everybody. Thank you all for joining in, tackling with the technology. Hopefully you all got your papers. Thanks, Hannah, for promptly dispatching them all. Has everybody been on a Zoom meeting now? Do we want to have most people? You just nod or shake your heads if you want us to just do the raise hand, lower hand bit. Everybody's good? Okay, right, so we'll formally start the meeting. Thanks everybody for your attendance this evening. Got the minutes, got the agenda in front of you. Apologies then, please, Hannah.
Thank you, Chairman. So we've had apologies from Councillor Barrett. If you don't mind, I'll take this opportunity to do a roll call as well. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So when I call your name, councillors, please may you just unmute and let me know that you're here. So thank you. Councillor Hanley.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Mercer. Just try and unmute.
Yeah. You got me.
Perfect, thank you.
Right.
Councillor Noland.
Present.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Place.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Wheeler.
Present.
And then we've got Councillor Harbron. I don't think we've got Councillor Harbron. No. And Councillor Liss. No. That's fine. Thank you, Chairman. That's all.
Thank you very much.
Can I, and also independent member Greg Robinson, do you want to confirm that you're present at the meeting too?
Yes, I'm present at the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Right, thank you all. Right, ready to move straight to the minutes then of the meeting on the 28th of January when the whole world was completely different. Can I raise one issue to have mentioned to Hannah just before others dive in? On AC 373, internal audit financial management system, I'm sure most of you will remember that we were quite concerned about an internal audit report around the use of orders on the ledger system, on the ordering system. Actually, as you read the minute there, we did ask that an update on the proportion of orders going through the ledger system was reported to this meeting. Obviously, we don't have that report unless Richard wishes to say something further on that. And I'm presuming, subject to anything Richard wants to say, we will take that at our next meeting. Richard, do you want to comment on that?
Thank you. Just very briefly, we will cover, hopefully when we get to the review of the contract procedure rules, some of the actions that we can start to implement longer term to hopefully improve levels of compliance around that. I haven't got the most up-to-date figures. I don't know if Rob's got any update that we can give, because we did collect some data in anticipation of the meeting, I think, that was cancelled, but obviously hasn't sort of progressed since then. But otherwise, I can circulate something to the committee with the most up-to-date numbers, if you like.
Okay, Rob, do you want to comment, Rob?
Sure. We did look at this 3 months on from the previous meeting, but it was rather in the middle of some interesting things happening. But at that point, there had been no improvement. So I don't know whether the measures that we'd taken then had any time to have an impact. Now, we haven't quite reached the end of this quarter yet, so we wouldn't quite have produced these figures, but we will do during the next month, and we'll bring them to the next committee meeting. Okay.
I mean, I wasn't sort of meaning to put any pressure on particularly. I take the point, obviously, we've got the procurement documents here. I mean, if it feels more appropriate to the rest of the members, we could just take that report when it's ready, rather than circulating something separately to this meeting. That's in a way I prefer to do, particularly if we have internal audit at the next meeting. That's where I was trying to get to, really. Obviously, the update, as you've indicated, Richard, would be helpful en route, but that's where I was trying to get to, rather than forcing the issue at the moment. Any thoughts on that, anybody else? I'll take that as a no then. Okay. Okay, so so on that basis that we'll get an in-passing update today, we'll take the report back at the next formal meeting on the presumption that internal audit will be with us as well. That's okay. Any other points on the minutes anybody wishes to raise? Okay, I'll accept that. So they're agreed and will be signed whenever we can do that. Okay. So moving on then, public participation, presumably none. Declarations of interest? No. Right, so we move on to agenda item 5, a major document obviously for us to consider this evening, which is the work plan from external audit for the year ending 31st of March 2020. Richard, do you want to introduce this or do you want to hand straight over to our colleagues from Mazars?
I will just introduce in the sense that just to inform the committee that the management of the audit team has changed for this year. So whilst we had Karen and Daniel last year, we've got Mark Dalton and Mark outside as our audit management team this year. It's unusual in that whilst I've spoken to both of them several times on the phone, I haven't actually seen or met them yet, so this is the first time. So I just thought it would be useful to just make that sort of formal introduction to both Marks, and at that point I'll hand over to whichever of those two is going to take you through the report.
Yes, I do remain a mystery because we've just got your names at the moment, Marks. Right, are you ready to take us through your report then, Mark?
I am indeed, yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Richard, for that introduction. As you would expect, Chair, this report has been discussed and agreed with management prior to its presentation to the committee. We will take the report as read, but given that it is perhaps one of our main communications for the year, we will, Chair, if we may, highlight the key messages.
Yeah.
So we'll let Mark Outerside, who is the engagement manager, take you through the key points. But by way of introduction, the audit strategy memorandum sets out our responsibilities as your external auditors, and that's in relation to our audit of your financial statements and also in reaching our value for money conclusion. It describes our audit approach and it highlights our proposed testing strategy to address the risks that we've identified in relation to your financial statements and also our consideration of value for money risks as well. Mark will say a little more about those risks in a moment, but if I could just draw your attention to a couple of sections within the audit strategy memorandum. The first is section 6, and that's page 20 of your committee pack. We highlight there the fee for the 2019-20 external audit, and at the planning stage of the audit, the fee is very much in line with the scale as set by Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited. However, I did want at this early stage in the audit just to say that consistent with the rest of the sector, we will clearly need to keep that fee under review as we progress through the audit to ensure that it fairly reflects any additional work that might be required by our regulators. Obviously, any variation to that fee will be discussed and agreed with management and Richard in particular before we suggest any such feedback to this committee and also seek to agree it with the SAA. In section 7 of our audit strategy memorandum, we do confirm, as you would fully expect, the independence and objectivity of the audit team. I will, as I said, hand over to Mark now for a little bit more detail in relation to the risks that we've identified, both in relation to our financial statements audit and also our value for money conclusion work. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Can I just say, could you refer to the section numbers in your report rather than the numbered pages in the pack, because not all the packs are numbered. Thank you, Mark. Please take us through the rest of the detail.
Thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear?
Yeah.
Again, I don't propose to turn the pages.
Oh, you're there.
Can you hear?
Yeah, I can see you now.
All right. I'm lucky. Again, I don't propose to turn the pages, but I'd like just to highlight the key areas in section 4 of our report. And this is where we document the key risks for the 1920 audit. The first risk being management override of controls on page 16. I'd just like to say that this is a generic risk in common with all of our audits, and our planned responses around looking at accounting estimates and judgments, journal entries, and any significant transactions that are outside of the normal course of business. The second risk on the same page is in regard to property valuations, which has become even more important since the COVID-19 pandemic has started, particularly where the valuation is based on receipt of income. To address this, we look at the work of the valuer, in particular the judgments and the inputs that they have put into the valuations. The third risk that we have is on page 15, and that is in regard to the valuation of your pension liability. And similar to the property valuation, it's a large number and it's predicated by a lot of estimates and judgments. So similarly to property valuations, we will look at the work of your actuary and consider the methodology that they've applied this year. On page 18, we have highlighted some key areas of management judgment. While these are not significant risks, these are areas that we consider to be worthy of a bit of additional scrutiny, particularly on investment properties, again, impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's around your classification of whether it is property, plant and equipment, or is it an investment property? And the second one that we will look at is your bad debt provision, particularly in the context of completeness. Is it large enough? Section 5 on page 19 onward describes our approach to the value for money work that we're going to complete. And here we've highlighted financial pressure as a significant value for money risk. Again, there's a bit more onus on this around COVID-19 if we have to consider your medium-term financial planning. I don't propose to take us through any more detail, but if you've got any questions, that'd be great.
Right, thank you. Thank you for that. Anybody wish to come in? Raise hands. Over to you, members. Can I just look at the section 3, the timescale there, and perhaps refresh the whole timetable in terms of that planning cycle there? Obviously, we are just about to head into July. Would you say that the boxes up to that date are as complete as they should be at this stage?
I'm happy to take that question, Chair. Yes, so the audit is very much on track, and we're just about, in fact, to start the final accounts audit on receipt of the draft financial statements tomorrow. We will be undertaking the bulk of our final accounts audit in July and August, ready to report back to this committee through our audit completion report in September is the hope. So yes, very much on track. And very much actually in line with the diagram on page 3.
Excellent. Do you want to say a little more, Richard, about the whole national timescale timetable this year, which has considerably moved, hasn't it, from what we would normally expect?
Yeah, I mean, that's right, Chair. For authorities of our size or scale, the dates have been moved to, so instead of 31st of May for the draft, that's now 30th of September, and then the corresponding dates for the final certification, instead of being 31st of July as was, are now 30th of November. So the judgment that we made in terms of, because of the effort that had gone into the preparation of the timetable for this year, even though we were facing some disruption by people having to relocate and work remotely, and for the systems to all operate remotely. We took the judgment that we tried to stick as much as possible to our original planning timetable, and we've talked that through with Mark as we've been doing it. And other than, we just moved things back a month for practical reasons that, things do take a little bit longer. So instead of the end of May, we've since sort of probably middle of April, end of March, middle of April, we've been heading toward 30th of June as our anticipated date for the draft. And as Mark has said, that should arrive with them sometime tomorrow. So it just made sense, because we'd put so much prep into trying to work around that original timetable. It's caused us a bit more pressure to carry on doing it, but I have a feeling that the autumn's going to be difficult in terms of trying to plan for next year's budget and deal with whatever else is around the corner. That hopefully we could have got the bulk of the work around the statements of accounts out of the way by then.
Yeah, sounds like an excellent plan. Anybody want to comment further on that? I mean, there's a fundamental change, and I think Richard's clearly indicating that he's trying to kind of keep the pace up and not let all these things start to overlap. The three things are closing out the old year, understanding the pressures in the air, and then obviously starting to budget for the new year. Sounds quite a challenge. Anybody wish to comment on any of that and how we might track that in our role here in the audit committee? Right, well, that sounds like people are kind of okay with that. Clearly, a fine-tuning of the timetable as we move forward now would be helpful as we go through our different meetings, Richard, obviously, and that's a given, I think, in what you've said. Are people reassured on that one? Anything else in the report then that people wanted to highlight? I thought the Annex A was another key part of it. Oh, Greg, you happy to be informally, Greg? Please come in.
Well, I was just going to comment on the property valuations. I seem to remember last year that was quite an issue, and it's the extent to which restrictions and things could affect the activity of valuation itself. And given it prominence last year and this year, it was just perhaps maybe the management needs to think about reassuring the auditors that they can carry out the work, or the work can be done by, if it's done independently, or if it's informed by independent work. It was just that point, really, whether we could get some assurance from management on that.
So really you're saying that the timetable could go off piste if other individuals, organisations that have to have a valuation type role, etc., could blow that, of course. Good question, yeah. Richard?
Yeah, there were quite a number of issues for us to address really around the valuations last year. And we started work very early on trying to improve the processes around them. And so the council's asset base is valued on a cyclical basis. So not everything is valued every year. The more significant or risky assets are sort of valued on a more frequent basis. But this was about the process and procedures and the detail underpinning some of the valuation judgments, and having enough evidence to back up the conclusions that were being used in the accounts. So actually the work involved in doing that started sort of end of August, September, and it's been building into a valuation report that I think we've actually been able to share with audit colleagues earlier in the year, to show where we are in terms of our progress, to take a little bit of pressure off the overall timetable. Now, obviously, valuations, asset valuations, pension valuations, as Mark has said, are subject to quite a degree of uncertainty, and so we've had to include additional statements around potential impact of COVID-19 and some caveats around the valuation process as part of the valuer's report, and clearly that will form part of the assessment of judgment when we get to the audit. But generally speaking, I mean, whilst our valuer and colleagues have actually visited a number of properties in the asset base, we've got a portfolio for photographs and maps and diagrams to set things out. But generally speaking, I wouldn't expect the fact that now we can't physically access some of these assets as easily as we might before. I don't think that should be an issue in terms of slowing the audit programme down. Okay. I don't know if my colleagues want to add anything to that, but it's primarily a desktop exercise with some evidence underpinning it rather than perhaps the other way around.
Yeah. Anybody else want to comment further on that? That's really helpful. Thanks, Richard. I mean, just looking further into the document, as I was starting to mention, we've got Appendix A, which also gives us kind of a feel for what should be happening when, and presumably to a degree, some of these key milestones, if you like, that external auditor flagging here will drive our agenda setting as we go through the rest of the year. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true, Chair. I think the only thing I would perhaps say is the vast majority of those areas of communication will be included within the report that we bring to the September meeting through our audit completion report. But certainly, yes, they're the various areas on which we'll be communicating with this committee throughout the year.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's really helpful. Can I just also kind of a theme for myself here is in section 8, materiality and misstatements. I think sort of linking back to what Richard was talking about there, in keeping an eye on those levels of materiality relative to our budget is really quite important for us as a committee to be thinking about, and not get too carried away with some of the detail relative to the materiality of what we might be talking about there. So those are, to my mind, those are fairly key numbers, really. All right, colleagues, any further comment? Does your colleague Mark Outeridge wish to come back in at all? Generally, before we finalise our approach to the ongoing audit, I should say, strategy. Sorry, say it again.
That was everything from me, thank you.
Right, Mark, your colleague? Right.
And from me as well, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, right, members, then are we happy to adopt? Obviously, the only point we haven't picked up, obviously, was Mark's reference there to the negotiation on fee, etc., but we'll leave, obviously, that will be with Richard in the short term. So on that basis, are people, members, happy to agree the strategy as presented? Right, getting lots of nods there. Is that from a governance point of view, Guy, sufficient? Are we getting assent on that? So agreed? Yep. Thank you very much. Right. Thank you both, Marks. Are you staying for the rest of the meeting?
We will, if we may, Chair. Yes, please.
Yes, of course, we'd be more than welcome. Right, now we're moving on then to agenda item 6, a really powerful, I think, set of work here. Rob, I think you have been leading on this with Richard's support, obviously. Do you want to take this through this in your...
Yeah, Chairman, you need to do item 5 first.
Okay.
Sorry, item 6, if we're doing the exceptions under the contract procedure rules, then we'll go on to the procurement policies themselves, which is the major piece of work. But first we have to deal with the exceptions. Sorry, Chairman.
Right, let me just bear with me a second. I think my papers, yeah, sorry, I have turned that one over. So agenda item 6 then, the exceptions granted under contract procedure rules. Richard, are you taking us through this one?
I can, Chair.
Rob, it's up. Oh, Rob, it's up to you.
Well, I'll set it out briefly, and then if there are any questions either Rob or myself will try to answer. But it's committee members will recall this is a standard type of report where we, for reasons as set out in the report, haven't followed the normal contract procedure rules. So an exemption has been sought, whether that be from tendering, which is or quotations or whatever it is. But if we're not able to follow the contract procedure rules, we can request an exemption and set out the rationale and the reasons why. And the 3 contracts that are included for committee to consider this time are in relation to the council's banking contract and 2 pieces of work that were disabled facilities grants, where because of both the nature of the work that needed to be completed, the urgency of it, and obviously the sort of restrictions around how COVID-19 has affected some of this, sort of set out well, in my view, all 3 are sort of reasonable exemptions. In terms of the banking contract, slightly more technical, I suppose, in that we were part of a framework arrangement which ended and prompted really that we needed to make our own tendering arrangements for a banking contract. Really what we did was to, because we needed to sort of act quickly, we did some market testing. We engaged a specialist consultant to compare transaction costs, fees, interest rates on numerous accounts to try to benchmark our existing provision against a number of others in the market, and determine whether the price that we'd been quoted was reasonable. With a banking contract, you always have to take into account the sort of the cost of moving, because we have stationery and other sort of technical adjustments that need to be made if we change banker, and there's costs associated with those. The rule of thumb is that it sort of usually costs you around 1 year's fee or something close to make the change. So you have to sort of bear that in mind when you're sort of comparing prices on the individual components of the contract price. So on the basis of the work that was presented to us, we were satisfied that continuing with our current provider, which is Lloyd's, was good value for money, and avoided us having to change all our sort of related systems and procedures. But we will ensure that we're able to do a sort of full market comparison the next time that the contract is up for renewal. Okay. But if there's any questions on any of those, between us, I'm sure we'll be able to answer them.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Very comprehensive analysis there. Any comments from members? Any questions to Richard or Rob? No, getting people comfortable with that. Is the date of 2023 pragmatic, if you like, and that would presumably, you would intend, all things being equal, that you'd move to a full re-procurement there?
Yes.
Now, on that basis then, members, are we happy to approve that particular contract variation, item number 1? Yes. Okay. Right, moving on to, as you say, the 2 very exceptional ones and driven by some of the emergencies. Who wants to comment on that? You again, Richard or Rob?
Well, I think I did briefly cover them in my introduction, but I mean, they're quite clear. In my view, the rationale behind the exemptions is justified in both cases.
Okay.
We'll see what else.
Any further comments on that? No. Okay, so we're giving approval. Are we all in agreement in giving approval for these 3 exceptional items today? Yes, thank you all members. Right, moving this time to agenda item 7 then, which is the review of the Council's procurement policies and procedures. A major piece of work with the help of a consultancy firm, Cirrus. Who wants to take us through this then?
Chair, if I just give a brief introduction, then I'll hand over to Rob, if that's okay. But committee members will probably remember, as we've been going through some of the outstanding improvement actions and audit recommendation items around procurement, a lot hinged on us reviewing and updating our procedures. So this is an important piece of work in that respect, because the governance side of it, is something that this committee is interested in. But beyond that, it's something that we should do as an organisation every few years. It doesn't have to be done, every year, but it's timely that we stop and review our processes periodically to make sure that they're providing what we need, that the governance around it's strong, that we get value for money out of our arrangements, and we sort of can steer the policies in a direction that helps to meet our objectives. We have engaged, as you said, Cirrus in helping us to do this work, and it was timely because we have engaged them as our specialist procurement advisor as well. So in doing that engagement, we thought it was helpful to engage them in this piece of work as well, because they support a number of other organisations. We've been able to draw on their expertise and their wider experience to help inform some of the hopefully improvements that we're bringing forward tonight. So it's been a really big piece of work, a detailed piece of work, which Rob has led on and done very well. And I would hand over to Rob now just to take you through it in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, thanks for that, Richard. I certainly would concur. It's a major piece of work, isn't it? And perhaps Rob, particularly in sweeping this together, could highlight Appendix A, which I thought was really a powerful summary of what's going to change, etc. Rob, are you there?
Sure,
yes.
Thank you. Yes, I've even managed to make the video work now, so that's an improvement, hopefully. So as Richard says, it's actually been 5 years since we last reviewed the set of procurement policies and procedures. So I think it is timely that we've managed to do this now. Cirrus did do an extensive piece of work, including spending I think three days interviewing service managers across Craven. So as well as going through all of our historic documentation. And I'm really pleased with the outcome that we've arrived at together with them. So some of the changes to the documentation that you can see in the attached report pack are quite minor. They're things like making sure that our references to legislation are appropriate and up to date, for example. And some of the changes in the documentation are things about our sort of day-to-day working practices and processes that don't really need a change to the contract procedure rules. Those are things like process maps, for example, which show the best practice that we expect people to follow when they're undertaking procurement exercises, and the new standard templates that we've produced for procurement exercises, which are hopefully a bit tighter, so that we don't end up with any issues when we reach the final stage of agreeing a contract with the provider that we've awarded. But there are some really key changes to our contract procedure rules that are required to enact the policies that we've arrived at. So I did think it would be useful just to highlight exactly what it is that we're asking that we would change in the contract procedure rules to enable these. Sorry, I'm just flicking between different reports on my rather small screen as I have here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the first change that requires a change to the contract procedure rules is that Cirrus recommended, and we think that this is right, that we should remove the interim £30,000 threshold in the threshold limits. The reason for that being that when we receive 2 quotes for an exercise, if one of them is a good deal higher than the lower one, we don't really have any way with 2 quotes of knowing that which one is either unreasonably high or unreasonably low. And we can circumvent that somewhat by having a 3rd quote. we are asking people to achieve 3 quotes for exercises between hopefully £7,500 and £50,000. The second thing that we would like to do, and this is after some discussion with CLT, is to move the lower threshold limit for competitive quote exercises to £7,500 from £5,000. Now, that will obviously mean that a higher value of contract can be awarded without a competitive exercise, but we feel that given that that limit has not changed in over 5 years, that there's been an inflationary pressure on prices generally, and that we are asking colleagues to do a little bit more in this process, so there will be a slightly higher administrative burden, and we do need to reduce the number of competitive exercises slightly. That's a reasonable change to the threshold. Now, the next one is about the criteria for exemption, and up until now, we've had a set of quite specific criteria for exemption around what constitutes urgent or an exceptional circumstance where only one product or service could fit. Now, the problem with that has been that the things that arrive on Richard and Annette's desk can be a somewhat desperate attempt to try and fit the exercise around the criteria that we specified when people don't want to follow the procedure. And apparently that's quite a common thing to happen across all authorities. So the recommendation that we've had is that we remove those specific criteria, make it clear that we will almost never approve an exemption, and that the expectation is that people will follow the process, but with the opportunity for Richard and Annette to sign that off if there genuinely is a real situation of urgency, as we've seen a couple recently. I think that would probably have met that. But that should, when we get into a place where, because you saw that we've only had one exemption really, plus those 2 urgent cases due to COVID-19 over the past 6 months, because we haven't actually had that much procurement activity. But as we start to be buying more things over the next 6 months, we might be in a position again where we want to encourage people to follow the processes that we set out.
Good.
So in the original contract procedure rules that we've had, it is possible for the service manager to delegate responsibility for signing off the contract to somebody in their team. That's in consultation with the CLT, but nonetheless, we think that it's appropriate for contracts between £50,000 and £100,000 for the service manager to be responsible for the sign off the contract. Yeah. The junior member of staff. Up until now, all of the contracts that we've awarded where we've needed to undertake a financial check on the companies, the check has been completed by a member of the finance team. So it's usually James doing it himself at the moment, which is I think a slightly unnecessary additional pressure on James when we can access a service which has a national database of information that we can use to make those sorts of judgments. And at the moment, we actually have access to the Experian database through the Revenues and Benefits Service, so we can make use of that. And we're suggesting that we word it in such a way that should we cease to use the Experian service, we could use a different one. I think many councils use Bradstreet. I'm not suggesting that there's any particular benefit in using one over the other, but that we should move to a position where we're routinely using a credit check of that nature for contracts valued at £25,000 or over. We're also going to start requiring people to use the e-tendering system. Up until now, we've allowed people to undertake paper exercises for tendering, which has resulted in the record keeping for our tendering being not as good as it should be. So if we require people to use the e-tendering system, we can make sure that people are following the process which is defined on the system, and it will make sure that we have a reliable record of that being followed. So when we're talking about something like raising the number of orders completed with an official purchase order, if people follow the process on the system, then there is a step which requires people to agree that they have obtained a purchase order when they complete the process. So we should be able to monitor whether or not people are saying that they have at least.
Good.
So those are the things that require a change to the contract procedure rules. There were a couple of other things that I thought were key that we just probably wanted to note. Now, this is quite a key thing, although it probably won't preclude people from doing it a different way if they feel it's appropriate and want and need to. But up until now, we've preferred open exercises where basically if we've advertised something, it's gone out to everybody in the country and beyond. Now that's great, and it's obviously appropriate for some things, but it doesn't really fulfil our ambition to develop the local market at all. And in fact, it deters local suppliers who know that they're going to be bidding against another 50 companies nationally, and therefore don't want to spend the time to get together a lengthy bid for something. So we're going to recommend that bids where it's possible to do so within the contract procedure rules are invited from suppliers from a supplier list, which will be made up of suppliers that we have used in the past and of suppliers in the local market that we advertise to be part of the list that we'll be compiling. And that should help us to achieve a reasonable number of bids for every exercise and to help us develop the local market better. Now we're including a section in all of the templates on with a question on carbon reduction. Obviously that fits with our ambitions regarding the climate emergency strategic plan. At this point, we don't feel that it's appropriate to score that bid because we haven't had the opportunity to speak to the local market about the fact that we're going to be doing it. So there probably will be a point in the future, and you'll see on the front of the document that we're going to be reviewing this set of policies and procedures every 2 years, and there's a date for that. Yeah. There will be a point in the future where we will probably start to score, but at this point we would like to give local businesses the opportunity to think about how that might work before we start scoring it. Okay. And the final point was that we are asking that any above EU threshold, which will still apply for various reasons, exercise is supported by a qualified procurement professional who has the expertise to make sure that we do the right things and don't leave ourselves liable to some sort of action as a result of having not followed the process correctly. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Right, thank you, Rob. That's very comprehensive and very well, I thought, laid out in Appendix A. So comments, members, thoughts on that? Clearly a massive piece of work. Any oh yes, Rob, do come in. Can we let Mr. Robinson in?
Yeah, sorry, Chair, and my smoke alarm's just gone off, but that sometimes happens in the kitchen, unfortunately, so hopefully you can't hear it. When I was looking at it, I thought that the procurement threshold of 7,500 to 50 was quite a wide threshold, and particularly it can be quite difficult to get quotations. So from my experience, getting 3 quotations, I think requesting quotations is fine, but quite often in a marketplace, there isn't necessarily the response that you're looking for. So if it was my policy, I would just try and tweak it slightly to say that you're requesting 3 quotations, but if you can't always guarantee you're going to get someone, I wouldn't want officers to be then stuck thinking, well, I've only got 2, and it can stymie things. So whether that's worth considering, because you don't always get them. And the other thing is, and possibly more radically, is I thought 7,500 was quite a low threshold for quotations anyway. I was thinking more like 20. And that way, because that way you just really focusing the procurement policy on the larger on contracts of a larger value. Now, this is almost an arbitrary level, and I know you've had some advice from Cirrus that have said 7.5, and I know you were on 5 before, but 5 is quite a low amount really for obtaining quotations in for a lot of things these days. So that was just my thoughts really on it. If you look at the procurement levels of 85,000 for services, 5,000 is a low level, 7,500 is still a low level. And so I just thought that if you pitch it in the right way, you do have a very comprehensive policy that's very thorough and make sure that the procurement processes are very thorough, but you're not doing it for things which are relatively small in scale and creating a lot of internal bureaucracy and trying to achieve that. So those are just observations. It's obviously something that the team have thought through already, but I'll just put those across, Chair.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you, Greg. Who wants to pick that up first? I know we've got the Chief Executive with us this evening as well, Paul. and Richard, as well as Rob. So interesting challenge there. Do you want to pick that one up, anybody? Anybody else want to come in and comment? Rob, yes, carry on.
So I certainly don't disagree with the independent person's view on obtaining quotes, and we'll certainly have a fresh look at the wording and make sure that's extremely clear. Although I will say there's a slight risk that the number of quotes that you say that you have as your minimum is the number that people attempt to achieve, and so there's a balance for us to strike. But I do take that point, and I do wonder whether there's something that we can do there around lower value exercises, particularly. Around the other point about the lower threshold, and I don't think that's an unreasonable point. When we did benchmark our threshold against those of other authorities recently, and actually for the majority of authorities, the lower threshold is still £5,000. There are some that are 10, but 20 would be more than any other district council in the region. Again, I think that these are almost arbitrary in some ways, and it would help some things and hinder others. So there is room for discussion on that.
Okay, you comfortable with that, Greg? Any further comments? Anybody on that particular point? Presumably, oh yes, come in, Councillor Nolan.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make the point, one, that Rob Atkins says that many councils have a 5,000 threshold. Is there, maybe there's a reason for that? And secondly, I was interested in what proportion of contracts are of certain values. So without the graphs or bar charts to show that, if there are a lot of contracts at the £7,500 range, then maybe that's an appropriate level, or not. Maybe that's a reason for not. I don't know whether I'm talking myself out of this, but without knowing the proportion of contracts at certain costs, it's difficult to make a judgment on that. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
To anybody?
Just picking up that point, presumably Cirrus had access to the profile of our buying patterns, if you like, when they came up with these numbers. Rob or Richard?
Yes. So now I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head, and I can't quite, but I think it's something in the range of, is it 40 purchases in total over 3 years that we made that were between 5,000 and 7,500. So it's that sort of range. And apologies if that's not quite right, but it's in that scale. Cirrus did conduct this exercise with access to all of our spend data for 3 years. So they have had some insight into what it is that we've been spending at various levels while they've completed it. I think that's probably about as much as I can say about those points.
Yes.
Okay.
This has been reviewed, has it, by the senior management team? Have any other this issue, has it been raised by any other officers?
Chairman.
Oh yes, I could see you.
I've had my hand up for a little while, honest.
I'm not doing hands.
Right, you're not. Sorry, I didn't realise that. My apologies. I'll lower it in that case. Right. Chair, I mean, what the points Greg makes are actually, very important. And sometimes the culture in local authorities is far more controlling than it is, for example, in the housing association movement, where I've sat on a board and the levels are different limits for very similar organisations. I sometimes think that, the officers in local authorities are actually excellent at eking out every penny of saving, and that we do constrain ourselves too much. So for Cirrus or anybody else to recommend a jump from 5 to 20, that would seem, whoa, that's far too much jump, can't possibly do that. But I certainly think that interim of 10 would be a very, very valid thing to put in for us as an authority. I think it would make us slightly more effective and efficient, but it also, on every individual contract, we make sure that the individual budget holders really do deliver on those budgets. They know it's within their own remit to do it, and they are held very tightly to account. So I would welcome that change to 10 if that is feasible and that the members are willing to back that. It does make a lot of sense. And in terms of the other element that Greg mentioned, yeah, I think Rob covered it really nicely from a number of points of view. But clearly, sometimes you cannot get 3 quotes back, and it is just as simple as that. In which case, it is presented, and we will action as appropriate. But again, I do welcome both Greg's comments.
So the challenge then, members, are people comfortable indicating this evening? Obviously, the final decision isn't with this committee particularly, but the changing the threshold to 10,000 as suggested there seems to have the support to Chief Executive. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of nods there. So perhaps we can ask Richard and Rob to have a look at that. That's really helpful. Just on that wider point, while you're there, Paul, what training? I appreciate that obviously this is an exclusive finance issue that's presumably in officers all across the organisation involved in different types of procurement. What training have you had the opportunity to do for those staff who are involved in actually running some of these processes?
The finance team actually carry out the training internally to the senior leadership team to ensure that they are complying with our own contract procedure rules, or as far as they can. Yeah. But it's very much to put that message across, and it's good training as well. And from my recollection, and Rob can correct me, but it's pretty well attended by the senior leadership team in order to ensure that they have that understanding. But that isn't just a one-off, because you know, Rob is incredibly helpful, as are the rest of the finance team, with any queries that any of the service managers have. And I've got to say, between them, we've always managed a way through. Queries have been answered, and if necessary, we refer it up to Teresa, or indeed anybody else that we feel we need that information of. But I've got to say the support is there, which is important to give the officers confidence in order to pursue the contracts.
Excellent. Can I just pursue one further point? Obviously, again, Rob emphasised trying to stimulate the local market, and obviously with the COVID-19, etc., this is incredibly even more important, if you like. Are there any specific initiatives developed yet that can really reinforce that hoped for outcome?
I think it's a really important element for us to support that local market. You know, it's about, if you've got a local contract, that's invested then in the local economy because the people are working locally. The classic example actually was a few years ago when we were looking at building houses on garage sites, where we found that the actual frameworks were just not suitable at all. So we actually invited in local contractors, and I think we got 6 or 7 who were on that actual tender list, and it works far more effectively. So from getting tenders coming back from firms in Hull or wherever, where you're paying for the travel and everything else, so it was double what we were expecting, to coming in within the original prices that we were looking for. And the nice thing is they are local, and it's investing back into that local economy, which is so important to us.
Absolutely. Right, well, that's reassuring as well. Any other general comments? Does anybody want to talk further on the detail? Again, a well laid out procurement strategy document that accompanies this. Anybody want to raise any particular points on that? No. Because if we just look at the recommendations then, Richard, just looking at you, no other points you want to raise at the moment. So the recommendation is...
Chair, just in terms of if we're proposing to amend the lower threshold value, it might just be worth us reassessing the sort of data that backs the figures up, if you like, because the original, I think, from Cirrus was recommending 5,000, which to some extent was, you know, consistent with other authorities, and then we revised it up to 7.5, And you know, if there's a will to bring it up to 10, it's this balance of risk, isn't it, around, you know, properly testing the market value for money against, you know, the sort of time and resource involved in the procedure. But I just can't recall what sort of data we're looking at. So, you know, how much of our procurement is in that sort of bracket of up to 10,000. I don't have an issue with it in principle, but it just might be worth just understanding what the numbers are before we, you know, sort of make the final recommendation, if you like. So,
yeah, I was on the same theme actually, Richard. I agree.
If it's sort of subject to, you know, just making sure that we're happy that we manage or we're aware of how many, based on our last couple of years' activity, how much more that sort of, how many more procurements that would have involved. Like.
Yeah, so keeping with Richard's theme there then, would members be comfortable that obviously we've noted the report this evening and the strengths of it. We've got the specific issue to do a little bit more data research on, and we bring it back for final resolution at our next meeting. Is that acceptable in terms of operational dates and so on? Or do we make it the other way around? We agree tonight with the exceptional item of a review of that level.
It might be, yeah. I mean, operationally, it would be helpful if we could move the changes forward so that ultimately they can be reflected in the constitution. Yeah. I think, whilst you know, in principle, if we want to go from 7.5 to 10, you know, like I said, for the reasons we've already discussed, that's something we can do. It just might be worth just reviewing the data of how many procurements we have on average in that bracket before we sort of sign it off. So if you want to do it subject to confirmation of that, you know, if something like 60% of all our procurement was somewhere between 7,500 and 10,000, then we might want to look at it differently. I'm not saying it is, by the way. I'm just, you know, giving an example. It's just that I haven't got that data with me to kind of make a judgment on it now. So perhaps if we just do it subject to that approval, is that okay?
Yeah, just looking at Guy
Paul's got his hand up there.
Sorry, and Paul,
All I suggest, Chair, is that when Richard's got the figures together, why doesn't he just have it in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair? Because that'd be nice and simple. You can move it on today. Richard gets the information, just gives a quick consultation to yourself and the Vice Chair. If you're both still happy, fine, 10,000 is the recommendation.
Okay. Anybody have any problem with that? That's a very sensible, pragmatic solution. So generally speaking then, and Greg's agreeing, that's nice, we're approving the two documents as is, in line with the recommendations, with the one exception that there's going to be a snappy piece of process, just checking the data and ensuring that we feel comfortable in moving the lower rate up to 10,000. Okay.
I think Annette might want to just come in at this point. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Could I ask that you do a proper vote for this item, please?
I'm happy with that. Right, just you ready? Should we just go round?
Chair, first of all, if we could just have someone to move and second the recommendations, and then after that, Hannah will be in a position to take a roll call of members' voting intentions. So, but if we could just have someone to move and second the recommendations first.
Right. So the recommendation has just that one amendment to it for a snappy piece of process, but the presumption is that the main document will be approved. So does anybody want to create a form of words? Unless, have I done that enough? Am I allowed to do that? Anybody else want to have a go at that?
I'm not entirely clear on what's being proposed.
Fair enough. What's being proposed is, and let's see if I can get this right, that we approve the documents with the one exception, that the movement of the procurement level referenced in Annex A item, the second bullet point down, and obviously a reference in the document to that lower limit is moved to 10,000, is being further reviewed in the light of the profile, if you like, of the buying pattern. and whether or not we have what proportion of our spend goes on items over 10,000 as compared with below that figure, compared with the 7,500. That's probably clear as mud now. Anybody want to put that more succinctly? Councillor Nolan, you're okay with that? Yes, good, thank you. Anybody, have you got the recommendation, the amendment, Hannah?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if we just have a mover and a seconder.
Yeah, okay. A mover, please.
You could do that from the chair.
Right, well, I will do that from the chair. I have to say, to my eternal shame, does anybody know if they're the vice chair?
Can't remember who isn't it?
Anyway, does anyone else want to second it? Councillor Place, thank you. Is that seconded? Yes. So it's proposed by myself, seconded by Councillor Place, please, Hannah. Right.
Yeah. I'll just take the roll call then, if that's
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we either agree or disagree.
The same as before, when I did the roll call previously. So Councillor Hull.
Agree.
Councillor Hanley.
Yes. Vote. Yeah.
Councillor Mercer.
Sorry. Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, just if I could just come in, Chair, if members could just state clearly whether they're voting for, against, or abstain, please, just so we've got a clear record for the minutes. Thank you.
Councillor Noland.
For.
Councillor Place.
For.
And Councillor Wheeler.
Abstain.
I do apologise. I'm not 100% sure if our independent person votes. Can I just double check with that one? No. Okay, thank you. That's all then, Chairman. Thank you.
Right, well, thank you for that, members. That would appear to conclude our business for this evening, unless there are any other items anybody wishes to raise. Councillor Hanley, yes.
Yes, it's a little point. On page 16, 6/1, doesn't that want to read the same figure as well? At the moment, it says £5,000. Doesn't that want raising to
right.
7.5 or 10,000, whichever? Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just going to come back on that point. I would very much like it to, but I'm afraid we can't do that. It's not quite the same thing. So that's the requirements for the contract register, and that's it's a separate legal framework. It's from the transparency agenda requirements. So we are required to publish details of all contracts at £5,000 and over, regardless of whether or not we followed the process in the contract procedure rules. So we can't quite do that, although I'd very much like it to say the same thing, because that would be procedurally very useful for us.
Yeah, so you've got to go back through the data anyway to identify that for a national return or something. Yeah, okay. Well, thanks for that, Councillor Hamley. Right, so on the basis then that we have no further business, is Hannah or Guy able to confirm the date and time of our next meeting?
I don't have a record of the date of the next meeting. I think it's sometime towards the end of July. I appreciate that's not particularly helpful. I don't know if anyone else can step in and help with this at this point. Otherwise, I can have a quick look and come back to you.
Yes, Chairman, the next scheduled meeting is the 29th of August, but if we need to move that to the reserve date, it's the 30th of July. Sorry, I said August, it's July. So 29th or 30th.
Right, thank you, Annette. Okay, people happy with that? Right, and right, that. Thank you, members. Thank you very much. That concludes our meeting this evening, and look forward to seeing you later in July. Okay.